Hey y'all! Welcome back to the North and the South. I'm Annalisa. Welcome back to my channel, a community of modern witches and witch adjacent folks interested in learning more about magic, witchcraft, and spirituality of the North. And today we're talking about a really interesting subject that I get a lot of questions about, which is how do you build an altar? Altars have been around since humans have been painting on caves and decorating rocks and creating sacred spaces for themselves in order to honor deities or nature or whatever is the center of their spiritual life and existence. The good news for us, because it's such a cross-cultural and prevalent practice, is that there is no wrong way to build an altar. A couple of general thoughts about altars that I have found is that, first of all, the location can be anywhere. It can be indoors in whichever room or wherever in your house it may feel comfortable. It can be outdoors, and it can take the form of lots and lots of plants. It can be even a traveling or portable altar. And those are some of the really cool things that I've seen even on Etsy. It can be anything from the inside of an Altoids canister to an elaborate, beautifully carved wooden box that contains all sorts of small, significant items that can be packed away and taken with you on the go. I personally even have an altar in my car that I'm very proud of. And every time I get in the car, it makes me smile because it was actually built spontaneously by witches who had used my car and didn't tell me until they'd returned it, and it had an altar. It was complete with an altar. From my perspective, there are about 3 different general types of altars. So the first type of altar, an altar builder, is the constructed altar built typically by the planner. This type of altar is going to be centered on some source of inspiration, right? So it's going to be around ancestors or deities or certain spirits or different types of rituals or celebrations, ceremonies, events. It can even be around something that is particularly passionate for you. For example, social justice. The point is that you're going to have a very specific idea about what that altar is going to serve in terms of a function in your spiritual sacred work. From there, you're going to want to maybe anchor the altar in some ways. Now, I know that a lot of people suggest that if you're really kind of at a loss to even begin thinking about what to anchor it around, the 4 elements is a good place to begin. So have an element of fire, an element of water, an element of air, and an element of earth. Another way to find some anchoring in it can be in sort of finding the masculine and the feminine, and then maybe even the non-binary to make it a cool trifecta. And then from that, once you've really got it anchored in a way that feels solid, begin looking around for things that might have symbolic meaning for you, symbolic significance, things that are really asking to be placed on that altar. You can begin by looking around your house, looking around all of the things that you already own, and suddenly you may find that there are things saying, me, 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 me. I want to be in service to this particular altar. Finally, you can always look at occult stores and other places where you can find sources of information, inspiration, and even pretty little things that might be just perfect for the altar. The second type of altar and altar builder is the organic altar, built typically by the spontaneous person. This is actually a much more organic process of building an altar. It might just begin with a space or a place or a corner or a shelf and an intention. And from there, the spontaneous and go with the flow altar builder is going to be just scanning their reality and looking for things that are going to feel appropriate and feel right for going on that altar. The aesthetic may be a much more sort of subconscious process where, as things pop up and as they're placed on that shelf, they become a cohesive vision. Finally, there's the third type of altar and altar builder, which is the hybrid type of altar built by the witch of all trades. And that typically is an altar that may begin as a constructed altar and then is left long enough to actually become a hybridized, organically evolving altar. So this might be the altar that is built initially to one deity and morphs into one that is to 4 or 5 deities. Or this may be a altar initially constructed for a time of the year, but then morphs into something that's a much more timeless altar over the course of the year. Now that you've built this beautiful altar, what exactly are you supposed to use it for? Well, if it's for a specific event, a specific ritual, a specific lunar cycle, or something like that, typically what happens with these sorts of altars is that they're used as a central place for a ritual or a ceremony or a practice or even a spell. And then once that's over, the entire altar is dismantled, and that's the end of the life of the altar. If it's for personal use, you can light candles, you can sit at the altar, you can sing, you can pray, you can use it as a home base for journeying and trance work. You can even use it as a way to speak to spirit, connect with your ancestors, meditate, and otherwise engage in spiritual work. So the question is maybe how long does an altar actually stay up? The trick with that is to be sure that the altar energy stays fresh and vibrant. If you notice it's starting to get stale, then really begin to observe the altar, inquire into the altar, and begin to think and listen to what needs to stay, what needs to go, what might need to move, what needs to be changed in order to sort of rejuice up the energy of that altar. You know, a teacher of mine told me about a beautiful altar that she had in her front room that was a massive wooden hutch covered with just hundreds of beautiful items that she had collected over the years. And this altar had been really her companion for such a long time. She loved it dearly. And then one day, she looked over at the altar and the altar said, "I'm done. I'm ready to retire." And it took her a few days to even kind of emotionally come to terms with that, because it seemed like such a sort of massive conclusion coming directly from the altar. But she did honor the request of the altar, and she took each and every item off of that altar and examined it and looked at it, and then understood that it was done being in service on the altar, and she packed it carefully away. And when all of the things off the altar were taken down, there was a massive wooden hutch left. And when she asked the wooden hutch what it wanted done with it, it asked to be returned to the woods. And so she found a friend with a truck, and they took this massive wooden hutch out to a piece of property that her friend owned, and they placed it back in the woods where it asked to be, and where it is still even today, returning back to the earth under the open sky. So, what type of altar are you inspired to build? Do you feel more ready to start thinking about it by just identifying first what type of altar builder you might be? Thank you so much for visiting the North and the South today. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.